Hello, I'm SB Moores, and today I have finally gotten the chance to make a video. It's been what, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, something like that? I don't know. It's been way too long. I just have not had the chance to sit down and coagulate some thoughts together about any particular book that I'm reading, be it Malazan that I finished, or Malazan Book of the Fallen specifically. There's more to Malazan than just Stephen Erickson's writing. Or be it I read Small Gods recently, or be it The Black Company or anything like that. But I have finally garnered some time for myself, and I was thinking about what to make a video on, what to do. I finished The White Rose, I finished Shadows Linger, I finished Small Gods by Terry Pratchett, and then of course, as most of my videos are about it, Malazan. There's always more videos to create about Malazan, no matter how many times I look at all the things I've made videos on, and I like to do the epigraph analyses, and there's just obviously there's like dozens and dozens and like hundreds of epigraphs in this series that I could make videos on, or just the myriad of plot lines, after 3.3 something million words and 10,000 page behemoths. There's bound to be a couple plot lines that I've missed while talking about the books, especially since I basically have only made videos about Reaper's Gale onward, sorry, uh, Midnight Tides onward. I don't really have anything about House of Change, Dead House Gates, Memories of Ice, or Gardens of the Moon. Barely made anything about them. I mentioned them in passing. I remember I made a video talking about why I like the Seven Cities plotline so much in Dead House Gates, House of Chains, and the Bone Hunters, but other than that, I don't really mention those first two. And Gardens of the Moon, I don't think I've ever talked about, except for in Toll the Hounds discussions. And I don't believe I've ever even mentioned Memories of Ice, which, crazy enough, is my least favorite of the series. Still a 10 out of 10, though. But today is going to be full spoilers for the Malazan Book of the Fallen series, because today we are going to be talking about the Crippled God. Not the book, the character. Kaminsad himself, the chained one, the one who it all leads to. And man, I just don't even know what to say to start this off. A discussion about Kaminsad himself. I mean, there's so much to think about when it comes to the Crippled God, considering how he's treated throughout the series and how it progresses towards him. Which, if you couldn't tell, it does that because Crippled God is the name of the final book. But I think the best way to start it off as like a capstone of like what this character is, or like a foundation of what the Crippled God is he is Thing in Chains. And in essence, there's a lot of stuff, especially in the last book, very thematic with the Crippled God and very at times meta with the series, talking about I think I'm using the word meta, right? Uh, Sort of going outside the scope of the text and recontextualizing everything that we've read up until this point. And it really comes to a head when there's three moments where the actual words, the Malazan Book of the Fallen or the Book of the Fallen, are mentioned, to my knowledge, in the series. In the beginning of The Crippled God, there's two poems by Fisher Keltath, which are called Night of the Poet, the Malazan Book of the Fallen. So I'm guessing there is an epic poem that Fisher Keltath created called the Malazan Book of the Fallen, which probably, I mean, the bits that we see don't particularly reference anything more thematic, I'd argue, based off of my memory of those. I haven't read them in months since I read the beginning of The Crippled God. But he doesn't mention anything specific, so it seems to be more of a thematic thing. But I'm imagining the rest of the Malazan Book of the Fallen that we don't see might be truly poetic and reference actual events throughout the series. And then there's a scene where Fiddler says to himself that somebody should create a Malazan Book of the Fallen. Or he doesn't say someone should create, he says something along the lines of, what is the purpose of this is the legacy this Malazan Book of the Fallen has left. Which was very poetic, very apt. I really enjoyed that scene. And then there's a scene with the Crippled God close to the end of the series, close to the end of the book, where he says something along the lines of only the Chained One is fit to write a Book of the Fallen. And he says that it will be his magnum opus, and you could wheel your head and wrench around and look upon 1,000 gods, and not one of them can lay claim to what the Crippled God can, which is that he can write this book. After all, who is better to write it than the one in chains? He says something like that, or no, he says, who would be more perfect to write it than the Chained One? Which I feel makes a lot of sense, especially for where the series goes, what the end game of everything that's happened, all the way from Pale up until the Spire at Colance and then the Barrow at Derekazon, where there's a really big convergence. Um, Everything led up to the Crippled God. And this is the first thing I'll talk about, because this is just sort of like a general discussion on a lot of thoughts that I have about the Crippled God, because when I finished this series, the final line of it and what happened at the end just really stuck out to me. And that final line, and the weather vane but squealed like a thing in chains. And it really pulls it all together that makes you like after the climax of the final book, obviously we have to get that sort of that falling action and not that that's always followed, but we sort of get that send off to everybody, and the Crippled God's already, everything with him's been dealt with, and it's more about the characters who did it to make it possible, to make everything that happened possible, and what they're going to do, sort of, or like their closure for everything that's just occurred. And besides it just being a very good second epilogue, I mean, the first epilogue was great as well, but that second epilogue being about Fiddler, fantastic. But getting that final line where at this point you're probably like 60 pages removed from the Crippled God even being on page. So, you finally get to that final thing and you get that sort of poetic cyclical thing where we go back to the start of it all. It started in Mox Vane. It's going to end at Mox Vane. And, it starts off with a paragraph long description of Mox Weathervane, and it ends with like a 3-paragraph long description of Mox Weathervane. But then it really wrenches you around, pun intended, by talking about how the weather vane is being wrenched around by the wind, but then it jams and squeals from being so rusted and old and decayed over all the years. And the wind buffets it, but the weather vane but squeals like a thing in chains. And it really, it's like the most, it really just pulls it all together, just thinking about what happened and what purpose of everything was, sort of, or like not the purpose per se, but like what everything was leading up to with the Crippled God, and how I think it's a perfect ending to the series. I think that it made so much sense that the entire time the Crippled God is sort of being cast in this negative light. He's the villain. He's the guy the Pantheon hates. All humans hate him. His worshippers suck. He's poisoning the Warrens. He's poisoning Burn. And he's chained as far as we know, probably for a good reason. And, everything we see him do is quite frankly terrible. Everything that happened with the Pantheon Domin, I believe he influenced, if I'm not mistaken. And then, he aided in what went on in 7 cities, and then, it's kind of left open-ended in this series, but it seems as if he's about to plunge them into the exact same thing that just happened, with a third Shaik. But there's that. There's everything that happened on Lether with the Teist Eder. And we just see time and time again that the Crippled God just does not seem like a good guy. It just seems like everything he does is just to make other people suffer. And there always was that idea. It's like, why is he the Crippled God? What did he do that crippled him so? And, we're not really given that explanation for a really long time. So you can immediately just think with the Crippled God, it's like, oh, he probably did something really bad. They chained him. And then you sort of start piecing together what actually happened. And it's some of the best storytelling, I think. To have it so fragmented, you have to break it up book after book after book. I personally really enjoy it. But I really like how we get these tidbits that the Crippled God was called down to their world. He's not even from the Malazan world. He's not from their pantheon originally. And then we get the idea that he was called down to destroy something. And it's like, okay, that's interesting, but I guess whatever he destroyed is the reason that he was chained. And then it gets to the point where you see what happened, and it's just terrible. And we get more information and ideas about it in House of Change, especially when Heberick goes on that Henbarati um, spiritual psychedelic trip that takes him into the middle of the abyss, which is just space, I believe. But it goes through all that. We learn all that information. We find out he was called down to destroy some terrible empire, presumably Kalor's, I believe, and he was fragmented from it. And after he landed, his pieces, well, we'll find it out later, but his pieces landed on 7 different continents, most prominently on Coral, aka the Land of Fists, or the Land of Fist, or the Lands of Fist, something like that. I believe it's called that because it looks like a god punched him, because of all the shards of the crippled god that fell there. But then we just find out that they chain him. They just decided, the gods, they chain him to the very earth. And a ridiculous amount of ascendants. I think it is mentioned at one point that at the last chaining that took place shortly before the series, that involved Dasim Ultor, Kellen Ved, Dancer, and a few other people, there were so many ascendants there that listing them off would be foolish. Um, which really makes you think how many ascendants are in the Malazan world, but there is that little comment Ganos makes, how he has a theory that there's too many ascendants in the world. And that's part of what's causing everything that's happening, all the convergences. It's to kind of weed them out, because there's too many for the natural order to sustain that many ascended individuals. But I digress. I digress heavily. But as you learn more about the crippled god, there really is this idea of like, well, why was he chained in the first place? Because everything that we've been led to believe is that he did not intentionally do any of this. Is that there were sorcerers who opened a very powerful rift in space, or a warren of some kind, and it dragged the crippled god from wherever he was and made him crash land on that planet. Completely unintentionally. And then the first thing they do is they chain him to the very earth that he was called to. They don't even kill him. They just chain him to the earth. I mean, presumably, even back then, he was an uberly powerful god, so maybe it was the only thing they could do. Maybe they were incapable of killing him at that time. But I don't remember everything 100%, so if I get any of this wrong, take it with a grain of salt. I get the general strokes, I believe, pretty well. But all of that really culminates, I believe, in Reaper's Gale, because there's a scene earlier. We'll move back. It kind of relates. There's a scene, or it's the final scene of Midnight Tides, where you really get an idea of like how kind of pathetic the crippled god is with everything that he's doing. Because he does all that terrible stuff on Lether, and then Mael is just like, well, I have a god to go beat senseless, and then which is just he can't even defend himself, the crippled god, as far as we're aware. Like, he can survive, but he's not defending himself. And then we move on to Reaper's Gale, and there is a scene before the ending with Silchas Ruin, where Silchas has been imprisoned for so long that he wasn't there when the crippled god was called down to their world. And he doesn't even know what the Warrens are. He predates the Warrens as well. And, he's a pretty fast learner with this stuff, as we see. Even if he doesn't quite understand it fully, he sort of gets the vibe immediately. But he has these run-ins with these worshippers of the crippled god. Some Karisnan of Hen and Mosags, who are all imbibing on the crippled god's power, which is very close to chaos. And we sort of see this moment where someone asserts that the crippled god is a terrible, terrible person, and Silchas takes mercy on one of the Karisnan. And then that person says that to him. I forget who it was. It might have been Fear, I think. But he says something about the crippled god being a terrible, terrible god that needs to go, or something like that. And Silchas Ruin posits that if the crippled god did not have worshippers that worshipped him for his crippled nature, and wanted them to be, wanted him to sort of act as, well, one, they're using him, but really he's using them in return. But they're trying to use him. They worship him for the fact that he's crippled, And not only that, they want a god for people that is just as malformed as them, be it in personality, be it as physically. We know the physical aspect is a very big symbolic part with the crippled god because he's physically lame. The crippled god can't really do anything physically, which is sad. But to put it bluntly, but crippled god, not crippled god, Silchas Ruin says that, where he says that if the crippled god did not have worshippers like he did, he might have healed a long time ago. And that really got me thinking. I'm like, that is an interesting idea because in the Malazan series, it's very well, you know, told to us that the gods need their worshippers as much as the worshippers need their gods, if not more so for the gods needing their worshippers. I forget who said it, but there's a character at one point that says something like, the mortal worshippers think that we're all powerful beings, but in truth, it is them who hold all the power in the religious relationship they hold, which is really interesting. I'm not going to say I haven't seen it done before, but I really enjoy the way that it's done in Malazan because it feels very visceral, is how I'll put it. Because especially with certain scenes, like with Karul back in the prologue of Memories of Ice, I'm talking about it now. Um, and him, Draconus, and the Sister of Cold Nights curse Calor, and then he curses them in return. And the curse he gives to Karul is that his worshippers shall wax and wane, and his worship shall fall. And I think Karul says it that he immediately feels it, that he's losing worshippers throughout the world, that his influence is fading, which is part of what him being an elder god is all about, is that he was a very prominent god in olden days, now not so much. Also, I think they mentioned in the sixth book that the elder gods are manifestations almost of primordial forces. So Karul's sort of magic, he created the warrens, maker of paths or maker of warrens. He used his own blood to create it because that's the magic they dealt with. The elder gods, they dealt in blood magic. Which is shown a handful of times. Male elder god of the seas, the sea, primordial. I mean, soup, primordial soup, whatever you want to think about it like that. I mean, it's arguably the first thing you could think of worshiping for a land-based creature that lives near shore is worship the ocean. I mean, it's kind of inexorable, ineffable, especially to the minds of the people in these olden times, especially in the time of the Elder Gods, which is very long ago, to the point that it was tribal for a lot of people. Or for Penacel and Hubo, I don't know his name. They're the god of wine and mead or something like that, or of like fertile fields and grain and but um there was that question as well in the Bone Hunters where Cotillion was trying to figure out if the crippled god is even considered an elder god. And I was a little confused about this because they had established that elder gods are primordial forces. But what primordial force would the crippled god be? You immediately think chaos because he's very close to chaos throughout the series, that he's using it to poison the Warrens and to poison Burn. But then there is also this idea that I had where it's like, I feel like Cotillion would have that ancient knowledge already, that he's not even from their world. He's not really a elder god in the sense that he's not even from their realm or planet or Warren, whatever the Malazan world really is. Um, he's not from there, so I couldn't see him being an elder god because that seems like something that is very closely related to the Malazan world and the adjacent Warrens like Starwald Demelane, the Teist Warrens. Um, uh, I'm sure that there's elder gods of demons in the Corald Gamelon or whatever it's called. Uh, but the Warren of Demons or something like that. But there was a lot of these cool themes and ideas going with the crippled god throughout all of the books, where it's the mystery of like where does he come from? It's like why is he so bad in the first place? And then it's like with Silchas Ruin saying those words, it's like hold on, maybe we all judge the crippled god a little too harshly. What is there to say that he is not acting out because of injustices done to him? Which is obviously what happens at the end. It's very That's a big part of it, is that the injustice of everything that's going on with the crippled god is so incredibly unjust and wrong that somebody needs to write it. And there is, especially with the crippled god in these final scenes, because a lot of it at this point, a lot of the crippled god at this point has been him being angry, being ruthless, being very conniving, trying to make as many people suffer as possible, and we're told that by other characters as well, that that's his goals. And that's what we see the whole time. We don't really get a lot of what he is like other than that. It's all that crippled, pent up anger that he has from being the way he is and being forced that way by this world and the people therein and the ascendants and the gods and everybody who has had the power to stop what is happening has not even made an attempt as far as we've been able to see. I mean, there being this idea that the last chaining, there were so many ascendants present for it that they couldn't even list them all. It would be pointless. Is just like, wow, there's that many ascendants in the world that have come just for this guy's chaining, and not one of them wants to help him. Not one of them is seeing past everything that's gone on and seeing how messed up what's happening is. But that's a big part of the plot line is that they needed to find the best in humans to kind of, or the best in us, to take a quote from the uh, epilogue one epigraph, the poem called Where Ravens Perch, where a man is trying to find the best in us. Um, and there are some really good themes with the crippled god towards the end, with the idea of him being crippled, and then also the idea of him being chained. Because I really feel like even though his name is the crippled god, and that's a huge part of it, a lot of his character comes more from that chained aspect, the fact that he has been fettered to the earth. He cannot leave. He cannot do anything. He is just left to sit there with this burden. And there are certain scenes that happen towards the end that are just so incredibly emotional with this whole idea of what it means to be imprisoned the way that the crippled god is, to be in chains and incapable of doing anything like he has been. I remember there's a specific quote. It is right after the scene where the bone hunters, the last of the bone hunter marines, are fighting on the barrow, and somebody asks, "Who are we fighting for again?" And there's dead silence, and then somebody just says, "Everyone," and then another dead silence, and then someone goes, "Huh? No wonder we're losing." And for some reason, not some reason, it just makes all of the bone hunters start cackling, their like cry laughing, rolling in the dirt, holding their hips, feeling like they're gonna break something because they're laughing so hard. And it's funny when smiles, um, which only makes everyone laugh even harder. And the crippled god is thinking about this, and he's listening to this laughter, and he thinks to himself, I mentioned this at the beginning, he is going to write a book of the fallen for these people if no one else will, and it will be the only book that need be read. Um, and then he says something. Really, it's four lines. The last line is very quotable, but I think it's even better with all of the lines. He says something along the lines of, "I never hid my hurts, I never I never betrayed my dreams, and I never lost my way. And only the fallen can rise again." Which is one of the best lines I've ever read. And for the crippled god, it was just so like I was because it's very visceral for me when I'm imagining the crippled god and everything he's gone through, especially for what the bone hunters did for him and everybody that aided in that. Because when I think about it, I think about what really happened to the crippled god. He was taken from his own world, cut off from his worshippers, and then scattered on a new planet, used as a weapon. Immediately, people start chaining him to the earth so that he can't do anything. And every time he's tried to get up and, just do something and leave and, try and get out of this situation, he's been hammered back by even more opposition. And the idea that after all of that, he has the ability to say, that he never hid his hurts, which I think is very true. He never betrayed his dreams. His dream was always to go home, to no longer be the chained one. Um, he never lost his way. There's a few things he said that I thought were kind of arguable, but we'll let it slide. I think for the most part, he's completely accurate. And then he says that absolute banger of a quote to finish that off. Only the fallen can rise again. For a series called The Malazan Book of the Fallen, perfect. Literally perfect. If that was the final line of the series, I wouldn't have been mad because that was just. I remember reading that and I was like, wow. It makes so much sense when you think about it because to rise, you have to fall first. But putting it in that way for a series like this, after everything that's happened with a character like that saying it, I feel like it's so much more impactful than if it was just some random throwaway quote in something else that was admittedly badass, but the way that it's used in with the crippled god is just so perfect. And then, the crippled god finally gets to go home. And I really was thinking, I should backtrack to some stuff before this that the crippled god does. Um, because when the bone hunters first come to the crippled god's aid, he's almost like awestruck that these people are going to sacrifice themselves to try and give him a chance. And they have no qualms, they have no problems doing all this. And it was so impactful, I think, the way that the crippled god reacted to this, how he is just like he can't even fathom it. He's been alone for so long and tortured for so long and chained for so long that he can't think about what it's like for people to be on his side and truly be on his side. They're not like the Eder who were using him for his power or his other worshippers that worship him for that crippled nature. It's not like any of that. Like the whole thing that happened in Toll the Hounds with the new Church of the Crippled One forming. But then we get this scene. I think I might have gotten something confused with the order of scenes because the whole quote where he says he never hid his hurts, he never lost his way, he never forgot his dreams, and he never and only the fallen can rise again. That came at a different point. When they're laughing, there's a scene where the crippled god thinks about the laughing. It might be the same scene actually, but he hears the laughing and it says something like, and the chains felt as nothing to him. As nothing, which really shows just what a little bit of compassion and some good human nature can bring out in someone because just the thought of these guys laughing with each other, it is, as he says, humanity unfurled before them, and it's so beautiful in all honesty what happened with him in those scenes. And then there's also another very poetic scene where you really understand that even though the crippled god has hurt so many people, now that he has finally been given the recognition he deserves by people and the help that he deserves from other people, Korabas shows up and someone immediately says that he needs to chain her to the earth right now. And his immediate reaction is, no, I will not. You're going to ask that of someone who has lived a life in chains? I cannot do that to somebody else. I would rather her die, and that will be her freedom, because I will not fetter her in chains. And then, he kind of relents because they're like, she's not going to be alone. It's what she wants. It's the only thing we can do, or else everybody's going to die. It's bad. TM will manifest, that was insane, to put it bluntly. But it was such a great scene to steal that. And then one of my absolute favorite scenes comes in this sequence where it's right before the crippled god is about to go home and the jade strangers are looming straight over them, which, I mean, the imagery is just perfect. The spire of jade shooting out from the crippled god, and Korik looks into his eyes and it says weird. And Korik says something along the lines of like he's felt lost for so long and he feels as if he needs something and he thinks that the crippled god could give him that, and he looks into the crippled god's eyes that are so kind and so full of compassion, and he feels almost as like his soul is melting, and he's like he feels as if the crippled god has the answers that he needs. And it also made it all the more sad that immediately Cotillion stabs him in the back. But as far as we're aware, that is what needed to happen in order for um him to go home and for the entire Malazan world to not get destroyed. Um, but it's still just so sad thinking about it. But I really enjoyed all of those things with the crippled god, and I really enjoy how he not only are we shown his suffering throughout the actual like what the plot, like what happens throughout the plot, him being chained and everything. Not only that, but he also suffers in the text, which I think was a deliberate choice. It's different in the way that you could say that Tavor suffers in the text because she does not get a lot of moments. She doesn't really get any. Excuse me. She doesn't really get any POVs. Same with Rut from the Snake. They don't really get their moments of their own character being shown. It's always through somebody else's lens or point of view, or a third person, just of a gathering sort of. We don't really get their specific perspectives on everything for the most part. But with theirs, it's a deliberate choice of keeping them away because that adds to the whole standoffish nature of those characters. They're the unwitnessed, and they're the leaders of the unwitnessed. So they must truly be unwitnessed in the text. And it also, keeping them away from the reader, it's kind of similar with Animander Rake. There's honestly, it's with how, I shouldn't say with how little. When you get less, you can imagine more. And it really is a moment of less is more with those characters, in my opinion. Um, which I was about to say cliche as that is, I don't really think that's cliche. I mean, I know the saying's been around for forever, but it's very true in certain regards, and I believe it worked for them very well. But with the crippled god, I feel as if that is part of it. A lot more of it is that not only is the crippled god not given the due recognition in universe, but he's not even given his due recognition in the books. He doesn't even really get a POV until the final book. I think he might get a POV in Dust of Dreams somewhere, but it's italicized and you won't immediately know unless you really thought about it, I think. And I could be wrong because that's just what I thought. But it is so interesting that it's such a cool narrative device that we find out towards the end that the whole series is sort of the crippled gods look at everything that happened leading up to him being free, which is vastly interesting, and it really adds a lot of recontextualization, especially if you want to imagine that the crippled god is the narrator of the series. Because if you want to imagine it like that, then you really have to think he purposefully excluded himself. And he also paints himself in the worst light imaginable. Up until Silchas, Ruin, and all them sort of have these contrasting point of views. And it's all just so. It's very interesting to think about how maybe this crippled god thought about everything that had happened and everything that he had done. Because I'm not going to say he didn't do very bad things, because he did. He did horrible things throughout the series. But you also have to think one man left to suffer with an entire world against him for millennia upon millennia. What do you think he's going to want to do? Something good? No. I also find it an interesting detail how Draconus at one point mentions that, implying with the crippled god, that it's foolish to ever bring any of his worshippers out or anything relating to him, because where he comes from, every god is a shield anvil, which is a very interesting difference between the world that the crippled gods comes from and our world. Or not our world, the Malazan world. Because I was about to say, I believe it is a confirmed detail that the crippled god is from Earth. He is from our world. He's a person of history or a deity of some religion on our world, or he's supposed to be a stand-in. Obviously, he's not named after them because he's Kamansad. But um, there's those ideas with it, which is interesting because it's a big difference between the Malazan world and our world. Because in our world, yeah, a lot of the, especially with the prominent religions now, a lot of them, uh, a lot of their part of the religion is that God will save you and absolve you, and they helps you. Um, Even in maybe some ancient religions, it was like that, but I'm not too well versed on all the ancient religions, especially specific worship practices, more on like the lore and stories of them. But um, it's a very interesting difference with the Malazan world that almost makes it seem like Camisod really could not be compatible with them, because in their world, their gods are very much, they almost just feel like thugs a lot of the time, just always vying for power. The pantheon's always in disarray. Um, and none of them really act as a shield anvil because instead of having a shield anvil or them being the shield anvil, they get a human to do it, which is very just, I mean, is a cool idea in and of itself. But the crippled god being different in that way, that he is the shield anvil, and that is one of the reasons that his worshippers are coming towards him, whether he's attracting them or if they're following him. Um, we don't really know, or if he's calling them. We don't really get an explanation for that. But it's all quite just really cool. And the crippled god by the end, I think, became one of my favorite characters in the series, especially with the whole series sort of leading up to it being about his struggle with what had happened to him and the unfairness and the compassion that it takes to help someone that is suffering. And I think that for those reasons, it was perfect to name the final book Crippled God. Um, But those are just my general thoughts. Nothing cohesive. I sort of jumped around, but those are my thoughts on the Crippled God. I'll probably make more videos about the Crippled God because there's so much that you could talk about if you want to analyze every little specific detail. And if I wanted to go back and really reread passages with him or quotes about him, which I would not mind doing in the slightest if I can get the time. But with that, I think that the perfect way to end this off would be to say this. A sudden gust took it then, wrenched it hard around, and with a solid squeal the weather vane jammed. The wind buffeted it, but decades of decay and rust seemed proof to its will, and the weather vane but quivered like a thing in chains. And then one more thing. And now the page before us blurs, and age is done, the book must close. We are abandoned to history. Raise high one more time the tattered standard of the fallen. See through the drifting smoke to the dark stains upon the fabric. This is the blood of our lives. This is the payment of our deeds, all soon to be forgot. We were never what people could be. We were only what we were. Remember us. Remember him. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video.